Well, can this help both parties in the sense, does the attorney automatically represent the driver, or are they a third party? They don't represent anyone.
Sure. Well, the attorney doesn't represent the driver at that time. It's just like a consultation. If you were to get a ticket and then go to an attorney afterwards, the attorney's consulting with you at that time prior to you retaining his services. So what we're doing is we're moving the consultation process back so the attorney can monitor the encounter in real time so that perhaps there are things that you may not have noticed the officer do that may benefit you in some type of defense. Now, from the officer's perspective, it goes back to what we discussed initially. And that's if somebody is recording and having a third party that has no interest in the encounter monitor everything that's being done, it should indicate to the officer on some level that the encounter is going to go a lot. It should remove any worries that there's going to be something wrong during the encounter.
How do you keep the attorneys from doing anything kind of shady? Making sure that they are up and up and that they don't set. They're not in cahoots with the officer or they're not in cahoots with the driver. And how do you make sure? I suppose you can't ever monitor everybody, but what are you going to do to make sure that everybody's at their best behavior? Sure.
Well, we rely on the state bar. So what we do is ensure that they're vetted by the state bar. And really, if you look at it from a sales perspective, we don't believe that there will be any issues with them being rude to the driver because that's a potential client. To the attorney, it all comes down to it all comes down to the attorney's discretion. And we have a system to vet these attorneys, and we have, a lot of confidence that the attorneys that are part of our network, number one, are doing it for, slightly more altruistic reasons.
They tend to be a little bit better people. They're not the slimy. They're not the slimy attorneys that we're all thinking about. They're the people that really want to see change because they've seen too many bad things going on.
Absolutely. I mean, there's over 3.5 million attorneys in this country. So, there's over 80,000 attorneys just in New Jersey. So we're confident that at least 20 to 30% each state, would have a good enough track record where we believe that they're doing this for the right reasons.
We only want people who want it for the right reasons, period. And I suppose because they don't get paid and you have to do enough volunteering that the slimy ones might not get involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, my partner, his name is Anthony Drasikis. He's, in my opinion, one of the greatest attorneys in New York and New Jersey, and he's practiced for many years in criminal law in the Essex County area. And, together we've leveraged our contacts and really been able to go after attorneys, through certain processes that we believe, would be able to reflect the image that Live ESQ's traffic stop needs to present. So we're very confident in the attorneys that we have a part of our network.
Well, how many do you have at this point, and how many states are you anticipating being in right away because you have the attorneys backing?
Sure. Well, without going into specific numbers, our attorney network spans from coast to coast. So we have attorneys, throughout New York, New Jersey, Baltimore. We have some attorneys in Mississippi, also in California, and some in Washington State. We're growing our network daily. Really the most expensive part of doing something like this is putting together an incentive program where you can attract these attorneys and at the same time hit the ground in each of these states in order to, gain their attention. And that's the part that we're focused on primarily now. And that's continuing to expand our network.
Well, if attorneys are listening to this program, how do they get involved?
Sure. Well, all they have to do is go to our website, which is www.liveesq.com. And just sign up there. There's an area for them to put their phone number and we reach out to them directly. We do a lot of content marketing on different social media platforms and have been able to secure a lot of inbound attorney contacts that way. So
are they stuck doing it? Is it like being an on-call doctor? Like from this hour to this hour, you're going to be on call, or so that they can manage your schedule, or is it going to be? How are you going to? I suppose you're still working out those details, right?
Well, look, that entire aspect of the company it's concrete. Okay. All we're doing now is continuing to grow the network. In order for us to grow the network, these, details that you brought up have to be set. And the way that we have it designed is that it's similar to any FaceTime application. The moment they have availability and we have certain times scheduled, for certain areas and certain districts in each state, as soon as they have availability, they actually initiate the application themselves and they would be connected then to somebody close by. So we've set it up in a way where we can ensure that there will be attorneys on during certain periods of the day also overnight hours, but also have the, give them the ability to, connect whenever they have time. It's a way for them to gain new clients and also assist the people that they're working with.
It's a way for them to do something good, potentially.
Absolutely.
And to help, for a lot of these attorneys see the problems in the system. I've done some shows on some of the real big problems, and it comes from all sides, and there isn't anybody that is solely responsible, but there's, you can point to a lot of issues that are responsible. However, anybody who's in the system for any length of time has to see that we're broken. We're very different from other developed countries, and we need to take a step back and get in line with some of these other developed. We're so out of step with what's going on elsewhere in the world as far as mass incarceration at astronomical levels. We just aren't treating justice in a fair, responsible way. And how do we pull that back as citizens and take responsibility for that? And I would think the attorneys are on the front line and they're seeing it day to day, and they know that's the case. I would think you'd be able to get a lot of attorneys with that in mind.
Absolutely. That's, like I said, the most expensive part was, creating this platform, this incentives program, and also hitting the ground. But when we reach the attorneys, we see everything that you just reflected. The attorneys are really, they want to make a difference, and they see the problems of the communities, but they haven't had an opportunity to help somebody before they receive a ticket or before they're charged with a crime. So this is an opportunity for them to see it as it happens and also be able to identify issues or misconduct that occurs during that point. Sarah, when you talk about justice, from Live ESQ's perspective, really our premise is pretty simple. We believe that the justice system itself is designed the right way, or the justice system relies, mainly obviously on the Constitution, but the problem that we see isn't with the Constitution itself or any of the rights that were guaranteed. It's how those laws and those regulations are being applied to citizens. So the point where we believe it falls apart is the actual application. So when when the officers go to apply the law, it requires an objective perspective. Otherwise, there is no justice. If somebody gets a ticket, wrongfully and beats the crime, that's not justice. That's not justice.
I think there's a lot of education of the community as well. There's a lot of mental health issues and a lot of behavioral problems. And, it starts with our youth, and we have a lot of issues all around. We have a lot of criminals as well, but we're creating them, and it's how we're treating them, and it's not a fair system. And when I say it's not fair, for people who haven't heard some of my shows, when you have a 97% rate of people being convicted on plea deals because they can't afford attorneys,
right,
then that there's something. We aren't they don't get representation, right? Part of our Constitution is everyone gets representation, and they're not. 97% of people aren't. And so this is a way to educate the community. Keep yourself from creating a problem in the first place. And then same with the officers, because the police force, they're made up of people too that are going to do all sorts of stupid things. And I'm sure the captains and the supervisors leading these police guys are pulling out their hair with some of the stuff that these guys are doing, right? They don't want them doing all this stupid stuff either. And so they want to help educate them. And let's face it, that these people are facing danger on a regular, like the police officer in Minneapolis. Everybody can understand where he was coming from. He was scared out of his mind.
Sure.
And then because he was so scared and he shot this guy 5 or 6 times, he wasn't being able to be objective because he had so many emotions going through him. He was a human being.
Absolutely.
And so we have to look at that from all sides. But there are some serious issues we got to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, like you said, we're all human beings, and we all, face the same, emotional obstacles. And definitely he was stricken with fear. Whether or not that's, justifiable enough to just dismiss the homicide is one point, perhaps a training issue. But
I agree. I agree. You can't just dismiss a homicide.
No.
There's some serious issues here. Yes.
Yeah, there has to be some change. You can't. There has to be some modification to the way these situations are handled, and what the first option of force is. That could be another possibility. But like you said, we believe strongly that there are many truly honorable officers in this country. We do not want that to be lost in this whole situation. something that will provide a benefit to these officers is that it'll give them an opportunity, number one, to present who they really are, whether or not that's initially because they're on camera or not, but it'll give them that opportunity. Number two, it'll give them an opportunity to weed out those who really shouldn't have a badge to begin with.
Exactly. Let's get those schmucks out of there, just like we don't want the schmuck lawyers involved.
Exactly.
And we need to educate the community because sometimes they're being schmucks.
That's true also. I mean, you see the sovereign citizen issues and you see things like that. Yeah. So that's a whole other topic. But yeah, there was another issue, recently in New York, with this lady, who had, she was fighting the officer. She had an unregistered vehicle and she ended up losing her life, because of something, because she got information off YouTube, So an officer, an attorney in that situation, would have definitely been able to guide her a little bit more than some of the videos she watched. But, again, it all comes down to how the laws are applied. And, it's an all around improvement. We want to, look, there's no reason why if the majority of a certain community or a certain municipality, want to have their officers wear body cameras, then there should be no opposition. I'll give you an example.
This is a less expensive way for them to get it accomplished.
Absolutely. And then IBSQ way. Absolutely. Absolutely. It costs about $19,000 per 54 officers to get equipped with body cameras. But it's funny because in Ferguson, Missouri, where there was that initial opposition, one of their armored vehicles was $180,000. So it doesn't quite make sense. The armored vehicle is a remedy to some kind of problem where you can have, something to prevent.
I would be nervous too, though, if you're managing a whole group of people and they're all being monitored, it would make you a little bit nervous because that they don't always operate the way that you would want them to. But in some ways, if you're a good manager, you'd be like, okay, I want them watched because then we can clean them up and make sure that they understand how important this is.
Right. Look, they're public servants. And again, the person who should be advocating, body cameras the most is perhaps their chief, because, unless there's something to hide. It could even, assist them in training, when they see a situation.
It's kind of like they just have to go with it. Just go with it and see how, it's going to make everyone better.
Yes. So, there's an example of what you just said in Cambridge University. They did something called the Rialto experiment. So in Rialto, what they did was there was 54 officers in that certain precinct. And what they did was they equipped half of them with body cameras. It was studied by Cambridge University, I believe, in 2011. And what the results showed after just 12 months is that there was an 88% reduction in the complaints of excessive force or misconduct by the officer.
Oh, now, excellent! That's an excellent result.
That's a microcosm of how these things work, and an 88% reduction is extremely significant. That cannot be overlooked.
Well, and also, I bet you the community has a better outlook on it. They feel better about the officers when there's just that real good, respectful behavior back and forth, and the officers would probably feel better about the community. They might at first be a little bit frustrated, but once they see that the community, the people being stopped are being told to be more respectful, then their view of them maybe would change as well.
Sure. Again, this application can help on many levels. It's a spectrum. In the beginning of the spectrum is just a mere perception of impropriety, towards the person. And on the other end of the spectrum is a tragedy. But one thing that's for sure, and just like you have stated, is that communities that have better relations with their officers are more likely to cooperate with them when they have issues. Terrorism seems like an abstract subject, during this conversation. But, even if you look at it from just a conceptual point of view, having community closely engaging with officers without any type of fear, with no hesitation, that could also, help prevent other activities in the community that may seem that have.
Yeah, it builds trust.
Absolutely. And that's
building
needed.
Trust.
That's needed.
If you had your ultimate wish, how do you see this changing justice in this country? Absolutely.
So, what we want to accomplish, first of all, we want to make sure that every single person in this country is treated equally. We want to make sure that everything that they encounter is based on an objective scale. We want to, we believe that our application will actually change the officers' procedures. It'll force them to understand how to interact with such an application. And we want to reduce, we have a plan for a study, which we're going to analyze prior to live ESQ and after live ESQ. And we want to analyze the changes in how certain people engage with officers, number one, and how, and just the statistics.